Hi, everybody, and welcome to today's IOP Speaker Series event, Border Buses, a Sanctuary State Tests Its Limits. My name is Norma Ferrell. I'm a fourth year in the college studying economics with a specialization in data science. I serve on the Board of Leaders of Color, a civic engagement group at the IOP, and I was born to Mexican immigrants in Houston, Texas. I'm honored to introduce y'all to tonight's speaker, former Congressman Beto, Illinois Deputy Governor Sol Flores, the Resurrection Project's Eréndira Rendón, as they explore the impact of Governor Greg Abbott's Operation Lone Star on Texas residents, Illinois communities, and organizations in both regions. Congressman Beto joins us as an IOP current fellow and served on the El Paso City Council from 2005 to 2012, before becoming El Paso's representative in the U.S. Congress. Currently, he leads Powered by the People, a Texas-based voting rights and voter registration organization. Illinois Deputy Governor Sol Flores is the founding executive director of La Casa Norte, a nonprofit organization established in 2002 that has served more than 30,000 youth and families confronting homelessness. She was appointed by Governor Pritzker in 2019 to oversee human services agencies and was recognized as a champion of change by President Obama. And she's the proud mom to a newborn COVID baby. Eréndira Rendón is the Vice President of Immigration Advocacy and the Defense Project at the Resurrection Project. Rendón has served as the organization's lead strategist and manager on local and statewide campaigns impacting the lives of immigrants. Rendón herself is an immigrant with DACA protection from Oaxaca, Mexico. She is also an alumna of the Civic Leadership Academy at the University of Chicago. Our moderator for today's event is journalist Laura Rodríguez Presa. Presa is a bilingual journalist with the Chicago Tribune and covers the Latino community in the Chicago area. We encourage y'all to stick around today after today's events for the IOP Student Advisory Board's Municipal Election Watch Party in the IOP Living Room, which is located at 5707 South Woodlawn. There will be food. On Friday, IOP Speaker Series welcomes U.S. House Speaker Emeritus Nancy Pelosi. Tickets for that event are unfortunately sold out, but we will be streaming on the IOP YouTube page. As a reminder, please silence your cell phones. We will be placing a microphone in the audience when it is time for Q&A and giving priority to the first questions for students. Please join me in welcoming Congressman Beto O'Rourke, Deputy Governor Sol Flores, Eréndira Rendón, and Laura Rodríguez Presa.
Hi, everyone. Thanks for joining us today, and thank you all for being here. I've been covering the ongoing crisis since August, and I've talked to many of the migrants that have been arriving here in Chicago. My question to them is always, was it worth it, right? Was the journey worth it? And even in the most difficult situation, even when they're in the streets, sleeping in police stations or warming centers or asking someone for something to eat, they always say it was worth it. Yesterday I was in a funeral for a woman that was killed in Little Village, was found dead in the alley. And she had just arrived here 4 months ago. It was full of migrants, that funeral home. She had no family here, but she had her community. So again, the question to them was it worth it? Even after seeing that body right before them, and they still said yes. So my question to I know, Ede, you've been very at the forefront of this issue and often welcoming all those migrants. But I want to know, Sol and Beto, have you met any of these migrants? And if so, is there a story that has really stuck up, right? Like that really touched your heart?
So we had the honor and privilege of taking Governor Pritzker to the very first hotel where the state of Illinois housed migrants. And we intentionally got him there at 7:15 in the morning so that he could high-five the kids as they got onto the school bus and went to school. And that was their second day of being enrolled in that local school district. And then to meet some of the parents as we did, some roundtable charlas. And one of the stories that just stuck out for me, you heard Norma introduction say that I'm a new mom, and there was a mother there holding a baby exactly my age. This is this past fall, right? So baby's 9 months old. And she talked about the story of carrying her baby as she crossed several rios. And that at one point, the water had gotten to her knees, then her waist, then her neck, and at one point she was holding the baby over her head. And she said it with such conviction and clarity that this is where she wanted to be, that this was a place that she knew was going to be better for her children. And of course, that moment captured me as I thought to myself, putting myself in her shoes, could I ever do that? Could I have the courage? Could I have the will? Is there something that would drive me, to put my baby at risk like that? And so it sticks with me every moment as I think about how she'll now raise her child here in Illinois.
Right, because beyond a political issue, it's a humanitarian issue. But the conversation that will define our future and the future of your neighbors, as we know, there was just a recent shelter opened here nearby at Woodlawn. It's a political one. So, Beto, have you talked to any of them, and has there been anyone that touched your heart?
There have been a lot of people who've really touched me, whose stories really got me. And I think what you, Laura, and you, Sol, have just said about those migrants you have spoken to speaks to how desperate so many are to come to this country, not only because we're America and whatever challenges and difficulties and frustrations we might have with our country, it's still the best thing going on the planet as far as I'm concerned, but also because they can't stay where they are. Right. Because to do so might mean their death or the death of their child. And I think about families who describe, we were just, over Thanksgiving and Christmas, we saw a very large influx of people from Venezuela who crossed into El Paso in such great numbers that our Catholic charities and shelters could not take them in. They were sleeping on the streets. And many of us tried to find the money to put them up in hotels, but even then there wasn't enough space. And as we talked to these folks who just come from Venezuela, they described what it would have meant for them to stay. And so they took this incredibly perilous journey, almost the length of the hemisphere, to come to our front door in El Paso, Texas, risking potentially hardship or death for themselves and their kids. And so in some ways they have no choice. So to say, is it worth it? What's the alternative, right? To stay and die? This may not be perfect, and it may have come at great risk. And we should acknowledge that there are hundreds of people who die on this journey, and their names are almost never mentioned. Their stories are almost never told. Every now and then you'll hear a sensational story about, more than 30 migrants found dead in the back of a tractor trailer in San Antonio, Texas, or this or that individual case. But people are dying by the hundreds, forced to cross through the most treacherous paths possible, riding atop a train known as the Beast or La Bestia, not inside in a seat, but on top on the roof in order to come here. And just one story that illustrates some of the deep damage that our current system is doing to our fellow human beings. My wife Amy and I were at one of the Catholic charities in El Paso, Annunciation House, that was facilitating the reunification of parents with their children who had been forcibly separated in the Trump years. And I remember there was a girl, 5 or 6 years old, who was seeing her mom again for the first time in months. And instead of that happiness that you would expect to see on her face, a big smile, maybe tears of joy or recognition, there was the most haunting, vacant expression that you could imagine, because this little girl associates her mom with the greatest terror that she has ever experienced in her life. She was left alone, a stranger in a strange land, not speaking the language, having no idea what the laws are or whether she would ever see her family again. And so when she saw her mom, there was a lot there. And I would imagine it will take a lifetime to undo that damage if we ever can. And it's all the more urgent reason for us to fix this. I mean, Politically, you mentioned, I mean, there's political reasons to fix this, but just to do right by and for our fellow human beings who are suffering at such great levels for no good reason at all, we got to get this right. And I'm really hopeful that we do. And I think there's so much happening in Illinois and Chicago right now because of these two other panelists that gives me hope that we're ultimately going to be able to get there.
Yeah, we hear these stories, and I want us to understand a little bit of context of, and you mentioned some of the reasons why they're coming, and it can, and essentially they're seeking asylum, so they're fleeing their country, right? They're looking for a place where they can have a better life for their children. Your mother did that for you. Can you tell us a little bit of what these migrants tell you and why they're making this journey and why the influx started, right? Most recently, they've been coming for decades, but just most recently, the numbers have grown.
Yeah, I think the stories are similar, right? I came to the U.S. when I was 4 years old with my mom, had to cross the border, had to cross the desert. I was 4, so I don't feel like I have very vivid memories, but I definitely have flashbacks. And it was really moving to be receiving the first bus and knowing that I was witnessing the moment that my mom had to live through when she first arrived. And I think this, and so many of the stories are similar, and it's always worth it. If you ask my mom right now, was it worth the fact that she's now, approaching the age of 70, still undocumented, has health care because Illinois became the first state in the U.S. To expand health care. And that's where I really got to work with Deputy Governor Flores as we implemented the program without hitches in making sure that now over 50,000 people in Illinois have health care because of this expansion.
Yeah.
And so, it's worth it for her because she has, her children that were able to go to school because of policies. Actually, Texas had the in-state tuition before Illinois did because of policies that we have here, and is able to see her children really live the lives that that she always envisioned that they could. And when you see folks arriving and they have children, or you meet them or you talk to them really just after a couple of months of being here, and they really discover how difficult it is, right? You don't know how hard it's gonna be when you get here. And then you realize that it's gonna be a challenge to be able to find work without a work authorization. You realize that you don't really know what the language is. You realize that you don't know how to enroll your children in school. You don't know where you're gonna live. All of those things are very challenging. And very similar. The difference is that where we came with a network, when I came, my dad was already here. He had been here for 4 years almost. And we didn't have anything, right? But my dad lived in a 2-bedroom apartment with 10 other men. And so all of the men moved into the living room and into the other bedroom. And so at the very least, my family had a bedroom and a bed where we could all sleep. And that's really the difference. Is that folks are arriving, they don't have that network, they don't have that 1 bedroom, and that's really where the city and the state has had to step in to make sure that we're providing the very basic needs that these folks have.
Yeah. Now, before we go on, I think we should explain that the people that are coming in are paroled in, right? And Beto, you can probably talk more a little bit about that policy that essentially allows them by USCIS discretion into the country, but they don't necessarily have a permit to be here and they don't have a job permit. And it's pretty difficult and lengthy process to apply for one. So that is the policy that has been in place for a while. I know Title 42 limited the amount of asylum seekers. And now I believe the Biden administration just announced last week that even though Title 42 expires, May, they are looking to expand a similar program. Is that correct, Beto? Do you want to, I see you nodding, can you?
Yeah, so yes, all of that is correct. I mean, I think the bottom line for me is that this system is very, very broken, completely out of alignment with our values, our needs. We have unemployment today in America that we haven't seen since 1968. We have more jobs and we have people who can work those jobs. Go to the Northern Triangle of Central America and you have more people than you have jobs available, people who are willing to work these unfilled jobs here in America. and yet there is no reliable, legal, orderly, safe path to bridge that disconnect right now. And so what you have in this very broken system is a process by which someone can seek asylum. And my understanding of our asylum law, and I'm not an attorney, is that if you can come to this country and set foot on American soil and seek asylum and pass a credible fear test, fear that if you should stay in your home country, there will be real harm done to you or your family, then you begin a process that can last years, up to 6 years, to adjudicate your asylum claim. And in that time, you are in a status limbo in the United States of America. And what was so glaring to me in this recent New York Times expose that you probably read about child immigrant labor in the United States, these are 13-year-olds, 12-year-olds working on construction sites, in manufacturing plants, in the kinds of facilities where you're going to lose a finger or a limb, where many of these children, kiddos like the same age as my kids, have died.
Right.
And so we are reviving child labor in the United States, 100 years after it was outlawed, because we won't find the lawful path for people to come here. So could you reduce the adjudication time from 6 years to 6 months or 6 weeks? Could you have more immigration judges to process more of these applications? Could you not, as I think the Biden administration has done to some degree cynically, make it really hard for people who are transiting Mexico, for example, to present here? For those who don't know, and someone may be able to say this better than I, the new Biden proposal that is going through its comment period right now says the following: if you're coming from Haiti or Nicaragua, Honduras, and there's another country, El Salvador, there are 30,000 set visas a month, right?
Right, 30.
And you have to apply through CBP One app. And there's a number of slots that are filled every single day. And if you can't get in one of those slots, you apply the next day. And the deal is you apply through that app, and you don't apply for asylum by trying to enter this country between ports of entry. Then we're going to try to find that safe, legitimate, legal, orderly path for you to get here. But if you transit Mexico and don't apply for asylum there and try to apply here, we're going to bust your ass back to the country from which you came, which is a lot like the transit ban that President Trump tried to impose and was struck down by the courts. And so there's this political imperative that the Biden administration is responding to, of being tough on the border and showing that we're going to send people back if they don't follow the law our way. There is a legitimate attempt, I think, to find a legal pathway through this CBP One app. But for those who don't have a cell phone, can't use the app, can't figure out how to get that place in the lottery that's run every day, who find that they have to go through Mexico and don't want to apply for asylum there because they don't want to stay there, maybe the same condition which some of the parents of families in Chicago have experienced, they're shit out of luck, and they're placed back in harm's way right now. So this is yet another, Band-Aid is an overused metaphor, but another attempt to in some way patchwork this broken system. But while it has some benefit, including the new number of parole slots, 30,000 a month, it's going to leave a lot of people in a really treacherous place, including being bounced back to Mexico, trying to cross again and again under Title 42, which basically says that because of the pandemic right now, we can summarily, arbitrarily send someone back across the border without allowing them to apply for asylum in this country. I'd argue it's against our laws, against our values, might be unconstitutional, but it is the practice of the land today.
Yeah, I think it's also worth noting that whatever new policy or policies that are being made are not really taking into consideration the migrants that are already here, right? Which many of them tell you that they're here because they want to work. And we'll get into that as we go on. But, I wanted to talk about Operation Lone Star, and I wanted to talk about what is happening in El Paso, how did all that happen, and then how did Sol and Ere, your respective organizations, your office, figured out how to work with it. So Operation Lawn Start, that was March 2021 by Texan Governor Greg Abbott in an effort to bus the migrants to sanctuary cities. So Chicago was one of them, and I believe it was one of the last few ones, right? He had already sent hundreds, thousands to Washington, D.C. and New York. So it seems like, or at least it makes it seem like there is a ton of migrants and shelters in El Paso at the border. How is that? Tell us about, that.
Here's some numbers that can help put it in perspective. So more or less, más o menos, over the last few months, we've seen about 200,000 apprehensions at the U.S.-Mexico border. The El Paso sector, where I live, anchored by El Paso, Texas, but it includes the entire border of Mexico and New Mexico, is seeing 50,000 apprehensions per month. So a full quarter of those apprehended are coming through where I live, for the most part in El Paso, Texas. We're here in part to talk about this busing program that Governor Greg Abbott has implemented in Texas that is to bus these migrants out of Texas to Chicago, to Washington, D.C., to New York, and then DeSantis to Martha's Vineyard.
Right.
Really sock it to those liberals, right? They have bused, and you, Lauda, may have the most updated figures, 16,000 people at a cost of over $30 million, $2,200 per migrant to bus them to Chicago, $2,200 to bus them here. I just checked on my way here. A one-way ticket from El Paso to Chicago on Greyhound is $240 right now.
Yeah, and
really expensive.
If may I interrupt you really quick, I think for a lot of the migrants, that actually was something positive. They saw this as an opportunity to get somewhere where they would get help. So, that's an interesting way to look at it.
And I want to make it clear, I'm all for facilitating a migrant's ability to get to their end destination. If their sponsor or family member lives in Chicago, by all means, let's facilitate that. But to, again, politically and cynically put them on a bus, not warn anybody here in Chicago that they're coming, or send them to the vice president's residence, the Naval Observatory in Washington, D.C., on Christmas Eve, December 24th of this last year, for the same reason, or to drop them off right in front of Fox headquarters so that you can make the nightly Fox News. This was incredibly unnecessary and unkind to these migrants, many of whom, as you said, wanted to get to these destinations anyhow. It would have been helpful if there was just a little bit of coordination with some of these amazing agencies here in Illinois and Chicago who've done, again, a phenomenal job. And they've taken this really cynical ploy and they've made the best out of it for those who are coming here right now. So we have in El Paso with Annunciation House, one of our great Catholic charities, helped put people on buses or on airplanes for as long as I've been volunteering for Annunciation House. So nothing wrong with that, but we always coordinate with the sponsor or the host city that's receiving them. What's happening now to Texas is pure politics.
Yes, and just out of context, I think that, and I maybe talked to Ere before August and before they all started coming, we had talked about how there were some migrants coming in on their own, right? Before the buses, we had already seen several hundreds maybe of people getting themselves to Chicago by themselves, either looking for help at different non-for-profits or just showing up at ICER, right, immigration. But it wasn't until August when we learned of the first bus. And I remember, we were like, oh my God, holy cow, it's happening, right? Let's get myself out there. And of course they called me because I speak Spanish and I would be able to communicate with them. And so I wasn't even supposed to work, and I went out there and I was able to talk to some of the migrants that were sitting out there. And because there was so little time that people knew, that the government knew, that the Lightfoot's administration knew, there was not a lot of coordination, they were just sitting out there. Because of the language barrier, they also didn't understand of maybe the people that were explaining to them, like, wait here, we're gonna get you somewhere. So they were just like, what's happening? What are we gonna do here? It was cold, I remember, it was summer, so it wasn't cold. But now it was cold. But it was a really uncertain time, right? It was, so Ere, how did you learn about this?
Yeah, no, August 31st was a hot mess. You can say that it was, we didn't know. I know that there's always a lot of questions about, whether the city knew, and they were just keeping it for, really there was no warning. It was about 24-hour warning. and the city set up a center in kind of north of Albany Park, and then, we're set up a temporary shelter in Salvation Army. They had talked to the bus a few hours before the arrival, and we were all waiting there. It was some of the staff from different welcoming centers from the state, as well as DFSS from the city, and then organizations that are coordinated through the Chicago Legal Protection Fund, including the Resurrection Project. And so we were there waiting. We thought the bus was going to arrive. Really, we had no idea until we got a phone call from I believe it was like a police officer that was in downtown and was like, actually, the bus is here. And what we learned was that at the last minute, Texas called the bus driver and said, no, you absolutely have to go to Union Station, not to where you are, not to the shelter. So there was, we don't know how long folks were there for. They were dropped off, the bus just let them off, and folks were just sitting there. So we arrived probably 20, 30 minutes after the bus arrived, and we gathered up as many folks as possible. And the way that you know that there was real coordination already from Texas was that there was already reporters there. And so they sent out a press release before they notified anybody about the buses being there. And so our first job was to try to, gather as many folks as possible. And I think it was also a realization of that there's not very many bilingual city workers. And so we had to step in and kind of, be the ones telling the new arrivals about where we were going. We wanted to make sure folks knew they weren't arrested, that they were free to go, that we were going to go to a shelter, that they would be able to shower there, eat there, because those were the questions. And then we went to the shelter. And then it was actually a reporter from Univision, and then you, Laura, called me, and you were like, there's still people here. And so we had to send the bus back with other folks to go get the folks that had been left behind. And it was because we just didn't know. And then after that, the city really realized that they needed to set up shop at Union Station. Right. You could never trust where the bus drivers were going to go. So at Union Station, from that point on, there was always an ambulance and a police officer, and that would just kind of block folks from the the media from taking a lot of videos of folks. And then, the Office of Emergency Management and a city bus that would then bus folks to, folks would get off, we would tell folks where they were going, and then they would go to the shelters. So after that, it became much smoother, but that was only because the city and the state had to figure out how we were going to manage this. It wasn't because, Texas made any additional effort to let us know what was happening.
I think we learned about it from a tweet. And then we ran over and they're like, oh,
it was a tweet.
And then I probably called you a million times after that. But so, how did city and state figure it out?
Yeah.
Or have they figured it out?
Yeah, so we at the state of Illinois obviously work very closely with the city and had worked with organizations like the Resurrection Project and Abbott, and so there's relationships that exist, which is good. It's important people know who to call. And one of the things we quickly figured out was how could we work with the city on actually housing folks. And so this was a plan that was hatched, in a matter of hours. We didn't have the foresight to think about this and think in depth. What we did is we built off of the experience that we just had earlier in 2022 and late 2021 as it related to the Afghan migrants that arrived here in Illinois. Illinois took a number of Afghans and we resettled them in some suburban hotels. And so we worked with the city and we said, hey, look, let's do a division of labor. The state will house families and single women and people with disabilities in hotels. And the city, for the most part, will keep the single men. And so that was our plan out the gate. And we eventually ended up, the state had 11 hotels that were both in Chicago as well as suburban Cook, and included almost 2,200 people that made up around 800 families. And I think if you recall, That very first hotel that we were in was in Elk Grove Village, and we had the mayor of Elk Grove Village create this terrible, terrible narrative of those people have arrived in our community. Mind you, we went to the same hotel where we had housed the Afghans and had a wonderful experience in Elk Grove Village at that hotel with the other nonprofit organizations there, but a different group of people were coming.
So why do you think that happened? I was there too, and I remember I spoke to some of them. They were really afraid to talk to media.
Yeah.
But why do you think that happened, though, that big difference?
I'm going to chalk it up to the mayor's pure racist rhetoric and trying to incite what he was trying to incite there locally. So, I mean, it was really unfortunate. We eventually ended up closing that hotel in Elk Grove Village and moved the migrants to different hotels. Now, that was also fraught. We were in a crisis situation. We weren't going to call up every single local mayor of local said municipality and said, is it okay? Are you welcoming? Can we? I mean, no. I mean, we're responding in an emergency, and so we needed to have an appropriate humanitarian response where we're going to put people. I just wanted to add to Ede's characterization. You know, Ede and other folks like her, they were having people come off the bus. They had no idea about their history, what was happening. We had people come off who were pregnant, multiple months pregnant. We had people come off who had had broken limbs, who had wounds, who had not had their medication for chronic illnesses and diseases for weeks, and so we're in medical distress. And I mean, that's part of the scary, sad, horrific part of the politicization of this is you're putting human lives at risk.
Yeah. Beto, how did you feel when you learned about this operation and, what was happening with migrants? Or when did you learn about it, and how did you feel?
Yeah, probably like everyone else, this was an operation undertaken to garner media attention and political advantage. Very cynical and potentially very harmful to some of these people who were involved. In some cases, who might not have known where those buses were going, or whether they were under arrest, or whether they were by force having to do this when they were free to choose because they had been paroled into the United States and had temporary legal status here. But here's the thing that I think that the deputy governor was touching on that really resonates with me about this mayor and those people coming to this place. And that is this dehumanization that takes place when migrants, human beings, are treated as political pawns, or are referred to as part of an invasion, or as described as animals, as President Trump described many of these people who are coming to our country, or in his maiden speech for the presidency in 2016, talking about the rapists and criminals who are coming to our country. Mexico's not sending its best, and at best, it simply stokes and inflames anxiety and tension that people already have about migration, legitimate or not. At worst, you have something like the massacre in El Paso, Texas in 2019 in August, where 23 people were murdered by somebody who had heard this talk of invasion and posted online before he walked into that Walmart in El Paso and killed 23 people. I've come to repel the invasion of Hispanic people who are coming to take over the state of Texas. So this fear and this portrayal of the sky falling because there are incredibly vulnerable people who are coming here because they literally have no other choice or no other place to go. It's deeply shameful as an American, as a Texan, that my government and our governor would do this. But here's the thing: it is coming from, it is touching a very real need. We have this badly screwed up immigration system, and if you live in Del Rio, or if you live in El Paso, or if you live in many of these border communities, which, by the way, happen to be among the very poorest communities in the United States of America, there simply are not the resources, nor is there the capacity to be able to address all of this. And there really has been an absence of federal leadership, and not just in this administration. And there are many good things I could point to that President Biden has done, but for administrations for as long as I've been alive, they've really failed to take this head on. 1986 is the last time we had any kind of real comprehensive immigration reform. And George W. Bush to some degree tried, President Obama to some degree tried, but no party, once they've had a monopoly of federal power, has ever used all the political capital they've had to make this their singular issue to get it done. And until a party does that, I hope it happens to be the Democratic Party, those are the values that I share, we are going to continue, unfortunately, to be talking about this, and families are going to continue to suffer. And one of the things, Ed, I wonder what you think about this, but one of the things a conclusion I was coming to as I was reading that New York Times expose about these child laborers is whatever we might say about how we feel about the current condition, it kind of works for everybody, except for the migrant. It's cheap food. It's a consumer economy that is fueled by those who are making minimum wage or sub-minimum wage with no workplace protections. And while politicians might say, once in power, I'm going to fix that or the other, politically it serves each party to be able to run on either building the wall or fixing the immigration system. I don't know what it will take in terms of a crisis or a catastrophe, God forbid, that will shock the conscience of the country and force those who represent us to actually do their job on this. But Abbott's border busing program is just part and parcel of the politics around immigration, unfortunately.
Yes.
In this country.
When we talk about immigrants undocumented, we always think of immigration. It's always talked about, right? Immigration, which you mentioned, it's a way dehumanizing almost. I feel like every time we talk about migrants, we often refer to them as just numbers. There's no name, right? There's no faces. It's just numbers all the time. And when I do, even myself, when I do my reporting and I talk to them, it's like, how can I make them a part of the conversation? Because these are things that are directly affecting them, right? It's their lives. So, and I know that even at this point, I mean, how many do we have now, Etta, do you know, in the city?
Yes, I just looked at the numbers that have gone through the Chicago kind of processing center. It's been 5,056 folks that have come.
And that is undercounted, right?
Yes,
Can
only
you tell
the
us a little
folks that
bit
have gone
why
through the processing
Can you
center.
explain to us why that's undercounted?
Yeah, so there's the buses, right? So those are counted, right? Because folks arrive and we're able to count. But the majority of folks are actually not coming on buses to Illinois, right? The majority of folks are actually coming on their own. Either they meet somebody in Texas that gets them a ticket to get here, or they have a little bit of money left and that's what they use to get here. Or they end up in another state and somehow end up here because they hear that in Chicago it's better and they give you food and they give you shelter. So 5,056 have gone through the processing center. There's thousands more that have not. And when you were asking about stories too, one of the stories that stuck out to me was I met a dad that came and picked up his wife and his daughter who had just crossed. And he had been here for 6 months already, living in McHenry County, which is where I grew up. And 6 months, right? It took him 6 months to be able to save up enough money to send for his family to come over. He never went through this process, right? So folks have been arriving for several months on their own and maybe not going through the processing center.
Yeah. So many of them feel trapped in the shelters. They are grateful, so grateful for the food and somewhere to sleep, but what they really want is to work, right? So is the shelter and food enough? And I know that the state and the city have been struggling to even provide shelters, right? So is it enough? And so do we have enough, space for them?
Well, I mean, is it enough? I mean, there's been more spaces opening up, and the state's rolled out, several programs is allowing folks to find apartments and move into them. But really, I mean, folks need exactly what I need, right? Exactly what my parents need, which is a pathway to be able to get, to be able to legalize, to be able to apply, maybe not just for asylum. A lot of folks may not qualify for asylum, right? But to be able to, that's why we need immigration reform. We need to be able to adjust our status. We need to be able to get get work permits. We need to be able to get legal permanent residency, ideally citizenship. And that's not up to the city or the state, right? That is a federal issue. And the state and the city can do as much as possible, granting driver's licenses for more, for being able to go around and get a job. And there's 11 million undocumented folks in the U.S. And my advice to folks, because I can't tell them how to find a job without documents, is find one, right? Find one of these 11 million folks and ask them how they got a job.
Right. So.
Yeah, I mean, I think we're doing as much as we can. There's always more to do. I think to Eda's point a second ago, of those 2,200 folks that were in state hotels, a little over 1,000 have left the hotels and families have gone to their own apartments. So working with the feds, we have been able to use federal dollars to employ a rental assistance program. And so we're able to connect migrant families with case managers and housing locators. And they're educating folks about this is what it means to have a lease in Illinois, to look for an apartment, how you engage. And so we've had almost 500 applications processed. And again, over 1,000 people have moved out or shortly about to move out of all the hotels. And we hope to continue to do that for the rest of the 1,000 folks that are in state hotels. And then we're going to be working very closely with the city to help process thousands of the single men and families that are also in city shelters.
But ultimately, there's a need for more resources.
Absolutely, there's a need for more resources. And I mean, we've pressed the federal government. We have been, I mean, everything that's been said here, we, city and state, have been on calls and pressing the feds, saying, what can you do for the better coordination? How can you increase access to additional resources for non-border states? How can you quickly improve the process for the work permits? How can you extend parole status? How can you change where folks have to show up for parole? So, I mean, we are advocating to the feds, on a weekly basis.
Yeah, so now many of these people are afraid to find a job, right, under the table because they are so afraid that if they do and they get caught, then they won't be able to get their case approved. Now, we're talking about how difficult is it for them to file an asylum case? How easy or how accessible is it to them to get an attorney or anyone to help them file a case, because it's not easy.
Asylum is very complex, and we don't have enough attorneys generally. And also, of all asylum cases that are actually filed in the court system, only 20% are granted. So, making sure that folks know that is really important to us, because, we don't want folks to kind of have that false assumption that everybody's going to get asylum and everyone's going to get a work permit. That's just not the way that our laws are written. In Illinois, we do have a network called Illinois Access to Justice, and we were able to activate that network, and the state has invested funds into these organizations to hire more folks, right? So for instance, at the Resurrection Project, we just had our attorney start and 2 paralegals, and what they're doing is taking on a hotel, and by this Friday, we've screened every single person to see who's eligible for asylum, who's eligible for U visas, T visas, VAWAs. Like there might be multiple avenues for them to apply, but it takes a lot of resources. It takes a lot of just funding, manpower, doing the assessments, and then actually seeing a case through can often take at the very least 6 months. If not, you're looking at years that a case will take.
So my last questions to you, Beto, before we go on to questions from the audience is, how realistic is it that the federal government can step up and perhaps even allow these people that are already here to get a work permit sooner than 6 months? And I know there's been people here since August that are still in shelters.
Yeah, I mean, the extent to which the executive branch has power to make these kinds of decisions is being tested right now in the Supreme Court, more around student loan debt forgiveness, but generally, how much authority does the executive have to make decisions like this without Congress? Open for debate. I'd love to see the Biden administration push that limit, take it to the courts if it must be, but it's hard to escape, ultimately, if you want to get to comprehensive immigration reform, that there needs to be action by Congress. And listen, I mean, this school, the people who go here, the people who teach here, the people who leave from here, with this extraordinary, proud history in economics could probably make the case better than anyone. The benefit accrues to the United States of America. Those folks coming here will produce the population growth that this country needs by 2035, 2040. Net population growth will only come from immigration to the United States. When it's addressing issues of inflation or shortages in the labor force, it's going to be migration. The things that are intangible, culture, life, our identity as Americans, it's immigration. And I'd argue, geopolitically, it's our greatest competitive advantage. I was looking at the percentage of people in China who are born in another country, and it's 0.07%. Here in America, it's 15%. 50 million Americans, people who live here, were born somewhere else. We are so lucky that of any place on the planet, they chose us, and they're going to reveal their genius right here. And there's the moral dimension of this. I mean, we have the chance to do right by people who are desperately in need of our help. And then lastly, there's this justice argument that speaks to me. You look at our involvement in Central America, going back to the 1950s when we overthrew Jacob Arbenz Guzman, the democratically elected president of Guatemala, our involvement in the civil wars in Nicaragua, in El Salvador, the fact that we consume 25% of the world's illegal drug production that has to transit through these countries and is totally destroying their systems of justice, their police forces, militarizing how those countries respond to that. We have some culpability in this, and we need to do the right thing. And then lastly, I promise, we also have the capacity. Colombia, I think a country of 50 million people, has taken in 2.5 million refugees from Venezuela.
Right.
Poland has just taken in 1.3 million people from Ukraine. Jordan, I don't know how many they've taken in from Syria. United States of America, 330 million people, this gigantic country. We absolutely have the capacity, and again, to the tune of hundreds of billions of dollars over the next decade, we will be the single largest beneficiary of this if we can get it right. So those are all the arguments I'd make to the administration and to those people who are in Congress right now. But ultimately, they're going to listen to us at the ballot box. And if we make this our primary issue on how we choose them, they're going to make this their primary issue once they get into power. So, it's on all of us, really.
Great, thank you. So, we have our first question.
Good evening. Thank you for.
Speak a little louder.
Is this on? Or?
There we
Oh,
go.
here we are. Good evening. Thank you so much for coming in and speaking with us. My name is Christopher Phillips. I'm a second year here at the college. My question today is for Congressman O'Rourke. We talked a lot on this panel about the dire circumstances that a lot of foreign migrants come from, that they experience before they come to our country or even before they set off. And it is very true. A lot of these people come from genuinely difficult circumstances, dangerous circumstances. Now, accepting this premise, is it true that all of these people, or do you believe that all of these people which are around the world, which is easily millions, if not tens of millions of people, have a right to come to this country in particular and not any country that they arrive at along the way?
I want to make sure that we as a country follow our laws. So if someone comes and presents on U.S. soil a claim for asylum, we have to follow our laws. And I'm really glad that Ed had pointed out that 1 out of 5, if they complete the process, are likely to receive asylum and can stay here, and the remainder will have to return to their country of origin. That is the law. We are a nation of laws, and I want to make sure that we follow the laws. But right now, and I believe cynically, we're using a public health reason, Title 42, to arbitrarily send everybody back who is trying to seek asylum. I would argue legitimately and lawfully at our ports of entry and in between our ports of entry if they can't get in at our ports right now. And then there's this point that I want to make to your question. I think everyone loves their country the way that I love my country. No one wants to leave their country in most cases, except for a need to leave their country or for better opportunities somewhere else, very often wanting to return to their home country. So there are things that we could employ, like a work visa system, that would allow someone to lawfully come here, work seasonally, return to their home country. Without that, people come here, they don't want to run the gamut again, so they stay here and ask their families to come up and join them. So some pretty simple changes in our laws could allow for that demand that we see here, allow people to return to their home countries. And then I think there's this. The United States uniquely has the convening power to bring the countries of this hemisphere together and to solve some of the drivers for this, whether it's climate change, whether it's our illegal drug interdiction enforcement policies, whether it's the gross economic inequality that exists. We should be working on those things hemispherically. We have lots of other problems that we're trying to tend to right now. I get that, but this is always left on the back burner, and we always pay the price because it never gets fixed. So I want to make sure that we follow the laws, but that we change the laws to reflect our values. And yes, I think we can make that accommodation for those who have a legitimate purpose for coming to the United States. Thanks for asking.
Can I add that I think it's also a policy that is specifically meant to keep out poor folks. So there's policies that are meant specifically so that Mexicans cannot adjust, right? The 10-year bar, for instance. This is a policy where you have to have a sponsor to be able to come into the US. You have to fly into the US. In order to do that, that takes an economics, it takes money and it takes connections. And so by saying that the moment that you start crossing by walking, you're really blocking the poorest folks from accessing asylum.
Thank you, Ed.
Hi, my name is Yang, graduate student in sociology. So in the book, The Art of War, there is an idea of from orthodox to extraordinary. Orthodox means you engage with people at the level of the fear. You know what they feel, and you try to elicit that feeling. And Trump is really good at that. He talked about the story of a tender heart woman and the snake, and that's his signature story, and it's playing that fear a lot. And there's another level which is extraordinary, basically transcend the fear and overcome the issue and try to bring out the solution. So I wonder what Democrats could do to not only do the job engaging with the voters, but also achieve the extraordinary to try to make affirmative case for the immigrant or refugees. As Beto just alluded, the depopulation bomb is ravaging many other advanced countries, and this is an opportunity in disguise. So I wonder what Democrats connectedly can do to make such positive case, and what are the hurdles?
I think Illinois is an excellent example of how we have really great positive immigration laws, as much as you can do in a state. And we haven't seen backlash, right? You don't see folks automatically now saying that they're not going to vote for Democrats because of the positive changes that Democrats have created in Illinois. And it used to be that we had bipartisan support for things in Illinois. The driver's licenses that passed in 2012, we had Republican votes. And it was because it wasn't so politicized, right? Now it is. It's very polarizing, whether you're for immigrants or you're against immigrants, right? And in Illinois, what we've seen is positive results, right? We see, I believe now it's about 400,000 folks that have a driver's license that did not have a driver's license before, right? You see 50,000 folks who now are able to access medical support. You see folks like me who was able to go to University of Illinois and graduate as the first class of openly undocumented folks. And so in Illinois, we've done a great job of making sure that we lead with immigrant stories, that our local elected officials are accountable, are passing laws and passing policies, and have welcoming centers, and are places that are led by agencies that are led by immigrants, and it hasn't resulted into catastrophe. It hasn't resulted into a really bad state. It's resulted in a welcoming state in which immigrants are thriving.
Hi, my name is Sophie Hare. I'm a fourth year in the college studying public policy. So there's been some concern and hesitation in under-resourced and heavily segregated areas in Chicago about accepting some of these migrants. I'm referring to the Wadsworth School here on the south side in Woodlawn. And as a result of this hesitation, some have accused the city and the state of pitting communities with a dearth of resources against each other. What is your response to this charge? And how can Chicago adequately promote sanctuary policy while also providing for impoverished city residents?
Well, I don't work for the city, so but we have been coordinating a lot with the city, and I think folks should always be advocating for their communities, and if they if they feel that their communities have not been receiving the adequate resources that they should say so, and they should be standing up and saying what are the resources that they need, and I think it's important that we do so in a way that doesn't alienate immigrants that are coming who don't actually have no idea about what is happening locally and local politics. And so the city needs to both be able to stand up shelters, provide case management, make sure that the basic needs of immigrants are met, and make sure that the needs of their long-term residents in these communities are met. It's not an either or, it's definitely both. The community should be holding elected accountable.
Yeah, I'll just add to that and say, this crisis has really pressed us to think about more broadly about how we're dealing with homelessness and unhoused populations. And the fact that we were able to respond during COVID with hotels for people experiencing homelessness and with migrants in terms of standing up shelters, we're now trying to think more broadly about how will we just continue to encompass both migrants and unhoused people with these types of forward, fast actions. But Ede said it exactly right. It's both and we are trying to elevate the narratives of not pitting folks against each other.
So can you give us some background, if you can, about how those shelters or, how the buildings that are then turned into shelters picked? I know that recently there's a Kmart that is, supposedly going to turn into a shelter. So just a little bit of a background of how, is it infrastructure? Is it the building that it's already kind of ready for?
Yeah, there's a mixed bag. So the Kmart site is not a done deal by any means. It was just something that the state was exploring. We're not sure if we're going to do it. We may do it, we may not. So basically looking for large sites that can turn into congregate shelters. And so we want to, for reasons of safety, cost, and convenience, house a large number of people at one site. And that's hard to do. You would think it's easy if it's actually a challenge to do in the city to find those types of spaces that are safe, that are accessible in communities with local transportation, et cetera. So I also don't know exactly how the city has chosen shelters. I know that they've worked with nonprofit partners to say, are you open? Are you willing to house folks? Some have said yes and come to the table. And then the city's also been challenged with trying to find locations, as has the state.
Right. Thank you.
All right. Thank you. My name is Jacob. I'm a first year at the college. And I think that a lot of the policy changes that are necessary and important are somewhat obscure to people. Like, obviously, the policy that's going away and getting basically replaced by Biden is like Title 42. It's a public health policy. That's not something that people are going to be like, this is how we're going to, this is something we need to fight against to help immigrants. And then on the positive side, Beto, I listened to your podcast with Axelrod, and you talked about how important it is to get migrant judges to adjudicate cases, and that's not something that's intuitive to people. That this is an important issue. This is one of the most important issues in order to get people, in a more secure place. How do we communicate these necessary things that a lot of people's lives are hinging on? How do we communicate the importance in a way that kind of strips away the obscurity?
I'll start, and I'd love to listen to better ideas on this. It's really tough. There was a question asked earlier talking about the art of war and Sun Tzu and appealing to people emotionally. And Build the Damn Wall is so exciting because it's so simple and it fixes what has seemed to be this intractable problem. Just build the wall. That's all it's going to take, and then you're done. Now, I think those of us who put any time into the matter can realize that's not going to fix anything at all. There's no wall, no matter how high, that's going to address those problems in the Northern Triangle or in Haiti or the refugee and migration crises that we have across the planet today, and certainly in this hemisphere, but it's a solution, and I can understand that, and I can wrap my head around it, and I'm busy. I'm working, I'm raising my kids, I got shit to do. Build the wall sounds good to me. I saw it on a bumper sticker, I'm voting for that guy. Now, the dude who's talking about more immigration judges, let's expedite the adjudication time period for us, fuck that. You know, like I can't get behind, it doesn't fit on a bumper sticker, right? So what I think this will ultimately require, I mean, there is gonna be, I hope, look, I hope there's going to be the politicians so talented on our side of the argument, the side that wants comprehensive immigration reform, that really wants to address this and do the right thing, who's going to come up with the words that resonate and excite people, and they're going to vote on that. But since 1986, that really hasn't happened. What I think it's going to take is that president, that majority in Congress, that whomever, who, on whatever basis they got elected, are they going to turn around and use that political capital to make this happen? Now, for those of you who are old enough to vote in the 2008 presidential election, and for those of you who were old enough and voted for President Obama, did you vote for President Obama because you wanted him in his first year in office to burn that Capitol down to do the Affordable Care Act? Some of you may say yes. I voted for him. I couldn't have told you what his plan was to make healthcare more affordable. I just really liked the guy. I believed in him. I knew he was going to do good things once he was in power. There's going to be that person, I hope, just like President Obama did around healthcare, who once in power is going to use everything at their disposal to do the right thing. Because I don't think you can sell this thing, you know, in the way that it needs to be sold in our short attention span, mass marketing society, that you win it on a plebiscite or, you know, on a popularity poll. This has got to be one that is won through leadership. So I think those who really care about the solution to this are at a real disadvantage when it just comes to the immediate war of words and, you know, the 15-second short attention span cycle. That's the conclusion that I've come to as someone who's run in part on issues like this, and won and lost, and done so in a state that really is at the front lines of this really challenging issue. I don't know if others have thoughts on what resonates. I mean, I loved what Ed has said about, let's take Illinois. You're doing great stuff. It's politically popular. You know, that could be the base from which someone goes and does bigger and better things for the country.
I mean, I really have no opinion on this, but I see the way the two of you work together, and you work from the non-for-profit, you know, from the grounds, and you're in government. And I feel like that's an example of kind of like what you mean about having people in power who understand, right, like what the issues are, and then you're able to work together to kind of create this better system of working and understanding the migrants and their situation.
Yeah, and I mean, I think to just underscore what Beto's saying, having elected officials that then that are in positions of power to have administrations filled with people who have been nonprofit leaders, who have immigrant experiences, right? I mean, that's an example of what Governor Pritzker has done. I mean, if you look across his cabinet, that's who he has in these positions, people who have proximity to the experiences that some of the most vulnerable people in our state are experiencing, and have real skills and experience and understand a lived experience. And so, yeah, that too. Mm-hmm. But to Beto's point, I think we need to find the next election for Beto.
No. Yeah, over and out, yeah.
Hello, I'm Max, and I'm a second year at the university studying public policy and critical race and ethnic studies. And I think what's really disheartening to see is like these leaders and politicians that we've elected into office spouting like lies, misinformation about immigration and migration policies in the United States, and the media getting hold of this stuff and spinning these theories and conspiracies just all rampant. And it's made this a severely partisan issue in this country. And I wonder, like, what steps could our leaders take that are in office currently to, like, fight this partisanship? And how could we make this a bipartisan issue? Because I think that's a big obstacle that's standing in the way of these policies, these much-needed policies being passed.
There's a lot of disinformation, outright lies about migrants. I mean, to Trump's claim about rapists and murderers. On average, migrants commit fewer violent crimes than those who are born in this country. To the idea that immigrants would somehow be a drain on our economy, they contribute far more by the billions than they could ever receive in any kind of benefit. At every single turn, migration is a net benefit and a positive for our country. But there's so many people who've been led to believe something different. I'll give you an example. Last year, running for governor, I'm in a very rural county, Hemp Hill, Texas. And I'm at a town hall meeting like this, but maybe half the number of people who show up, and half of those who are there are wearing Make America Great Again hats. And some of them are in the meeting wearing their AR-15s and got their guns, and that's life in Hemp Hill. And this guy stands up and he says, my mother immigrated to this country from Canada, and she did it the right way, and she had to, go and get her green card, redone every 5 years or 10 years or whatever. And I remember standing in a line with her. She worked 3 jobs because my dad, he told us, served in World War II, was badly injured, couldn't work. So this woman was working all these jobs, doing this the right way. And he said, I just see people coming over right now, the southern border. They get the red carpet treatment, free health care. They're set up in hotels. They get free public education. And Beto, that just doesn't sound right. And I said, that doesn't sound right to me either, because that's not what's happening right now. And I understand your sense of injustice growing up the way you did and doing it the right way. And I just want there to be a right way for people who want to come and do what your mother did and made our country better by her very presence. And you know what? This is anecdotal, and I got my ass handed to me in the election, so I didn't win, and this obviously didn't work at scale. But the guy came up to me afterwards, and he shook my hand, and he said, I never thought about it that way. I didn't know that that's what was going on at the border where you live, Beto, in El Paso. And he said, I could get behind you. I could support you, because that's my one issue. That's the thing that I'm pissed off about, is people getting a free ride in this country. You hear the story from Eda's mom, right? And what she went through in order to create opportunity here still isn't documented, still is giving back to this country. More of those stories have to get out, but they're not playing on Fox News. And the only way I have found, and it's not been terribly successful, is to engage in person, in those rooms in Hemp Hill. That's the only way I can break through Fox News, is to be present, eyeball to eyeball, and have this conversation. So I'm with you. I'm disappointed that that's where we are right now in our public discourse on this issue, but we got to keep trying, because the alternative is to give up and to give into this, and none of us are about that.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Hi, my name's Julian. I'm a first year at the college studying computer science, and as was said, the police was playing a big role in this busing crisis, and the police always plays a unique and oftentimes controversial role in the context of sanctuary cities. And as we speak right now, we're in the midst of an important Chicago mayoral election in which all the candidates have staunch views on the police department's reform. So my question is, in the midst of this crisis, in one of the biggest cities for undocumented immigrants, for refugees, for this busing crisis, is it something that's hopeful or worrisome of the idea of a big police change in the coming months?
Of a big police change?
With the, yes, with the mayoral election, with a lot of them, almost all of them wanting a big police reform one way or another.
I mean, I think for advocates, right, it's whoever's in office, is we still need to do our job of advocating for the best policies, the best practices that will protect our communities. And, there's the long-term goals, and then there's the shorter ones of making sure that, for instance, a few years ago, there was a campaign to close all the loopholes within the sanctuary city policy, and then that was one. In Illinois, there's been, there's the Illinois Trust Act, and then there's been several iterations of that, and then that's been one. So, it doesn't necessarily matter who wins the election today, or who knows when we're going to know the results, right? Our job is the same, to continue to advocate for the best policies for our communities.
Thank you.
Great. We only have 4 minutes, so I think this might be our last question.
Hi, a little shorter than everybody else, I guess. El Paso, apart from being home to you, Congressman, and some truly great, food, it's also the home to one of the most oppressive and terrible border immigration policies that the U.S. has had, Operation Blockade, and that was created because of inconveniences felt by El Paso residents from Border Patrol chasing immigrants across their city. How do we keep that same xenophobia from developing in cities from Chicago, like Chicago, or other cities that are receiving an influx of influx of immigrants that they've never seen before?
I think you have to get back to there being that safe, orderly, legal path for people to come here who should be here. And my argument for those who stoke fear about crime or danger or fentanyl, and those are things we should be vigilant against, right? There are a lot of people who die from fentanyl overdoses, but if you are addressing 200,000 apprehensions every single month, the vast majority, 98% plus, people who want to join family, work, or seek asylum, legitimate reasons to be in the United States, there is no way you can distinguish the real threat amongst that haystack, right? If you create those channels for legal entry and due process that are missing right now, as through Title 42 we summarily send people back, you're going to be so much more successful at stopping the people who have no business coming into this country, those who are trafficking in human beings or trafficking in illegal drugs or anything else that might come our way that we're afraid of at night, right? But without that kind of logic applied to the challenge, then you just have this blind fear that, yes, even in El Paso, although we are an incredibly warm, welcoming, kind-hearted community, that though we're one of the poorest in America, out of our own pockets has really paid to make life better for those coming here. I see that in my hometown as well. And I remember being in Del Rio, Texas during the campaign, and someone approached me and said, Beto, I'm a lifelong Democrat. You know, I'm going to support you, but I just want you to know that last night there were 12 people stomping through my backyard. And it freaked me out. And it would freak you out too, Beto, if there were 12 people at 2 a.m. coming through your backyard who you didn't know. Now, nothing happened. They didn't break anything. They didn't do anything violent to me or my family. But this is messed up and it's got to stop and you guys got to fix this. So the political imperative for Democrats, I was mentioning like build the wall so much easier to understand than all these complexities involved in the solution, is we got to fix this or we're going to start to lose parts of the Democratic base in places like Texas. You've seen the changes in the Rio Grande Valley, the changes even in El Paso, where after family separation and the awful things that Trump said and did that led to the slaughter in El Paso in 2019, he did better in the 2020 election in El Paso County than he had done in 2016. Now, he still lost the majority of the vote, but he is doing better. And it's not because, I don't think it's because people like Trump. I think it's because they are so frustrated that there's been no solution to problems that they've seen their entire lives. So we got to fix it. I think that is the only way through. And it's a little bit disheartening for me to say that because it hasn't been fixed since '86. And I don't know when we're going to get there. But that's why I think that, you know, in the current Biden administration or whoever succeeds him, or if he succeeds himself in a second term, this has got to be the number one issue for like every economic, political, every moral reason under the sun. We got to get this done, or it is only going to get worse.
Great.
Thank you, Norma, for asking the question.
So we have the last one. Sorry, ladies. Just one more.
Okay, hi. Oh my God. My name is Ana Emilia. I'm from Imperial County, California, which is a border town. I lived on the Mexico side, but I went to school on the US side. I would cross the border every day to go to school. And I'm a citizen of the US, like by a fluke. I had a heart condition and I could only be born in America. And so I'm a citizen, but even like I couldn't get a bank account because I'm technically not a resident of America. Applying to college was a huge deal because, again, I wasn't a resident. And things like that were such a big problem with a lot of people in my community. And even if I was a citizen, my parents weren't. Like, I had friends who weren't citizens, couldn't go to college, things like that. My question is basically, when do you think this problem, because in California, we've seen different people take office, but there's still no like real change being done in like the hands-on side of things. When do you think this problem is gonna be eventually seen as like a failure of like bureaucracy in like especially in like border towns, instead of just like this big like news kind of headline, and like actual solutions are going to be given for people who have been struggling through this for like the last 30, 40, 50 years?
I'll say one thing real quickly, and then I want to make sure that Sol and Ede are able to say their part on this. I mentioned earlier that present company excluded as a country, we're kind of okay with the way things are right now. We're okay with kids working these incredibly dangerous jobs. We're okay with 11 million undocumented. We're okay with Ede, as much as she's done so far, not being able to fully realize her potential because we just won't do the right thing on citizenship as a country. Whatever either party professes to the contrary, the facts prove the case. So the point at which a politician fears his or her reelection because they have not made progress on this issue is a point at which you're going to see real change. Right now, this is not the driving issue that decides elections. I mean, it may be a factor, and it may be a driving issue on the fear side for Republicans. Elect me, and I'm going to close down the border and send everybody back. But there's really not the political market or demand for this yet. And those in power don't fear that they're going to lose that power because they haven't acted on this yet. The moment it becomes that, like what made Johnson in 1965 introduce the Voting Rights Act? He'd already told Dr. King that he couldn't do it. They'd just passed the Civil Rights Act the year before. That was such a heavy lift. He was all done at political capital. It's John Lewis crossing the Edmund Pettus Bridge and almost losing his life in the process, and it shocked the conscience of the country, and phone calls melted down the White House switchboard, and they had to do something. 8 days later, he convenes a joint session of Congress, and they get that sucker passed and signed into law by the summer of 1965. There was a political demand to do the right thing. There's got to be that political demand, and I will tell you, somebody who has served in Congress, the letters, the phone calls, the showing up at people's office and town halls, the protests, that stuff gets noticed. And you may think you're laboring in obscurity and no one cares. They really do, but that pressure has to be kept up and intensified and has to be in the face of those in power, or nothing's going to change. That's my perspective as someone who's held office before. I wonder what yours is.
Yeah, I think Ede pointed to this earlier. It matters who's there. And so if we look here in Illinois, when Governor Pritzker started his administration, we really revved back up our welcoming centers communities. And so these are communities that are funded by tax dollars specifically to work with immigrants that are here, to work with folks that have arrived either documented or undocumented, that's hyper local, that says, hey, you, Laura, or you're here and you're not entitled to any federal public entitlement programs, but how can we work with you? During COVID-19 pandemic, we poured millions into the welcoming centers so that these are folks who did not receive the $1,000 checks. These were folks who couldn't get unemployment insurance, but there were ways to provide them with cash assistance to make sure that they had food on the table or had assistance paying utilities. And the last thing I'll say is, again, hyper local. I'm here with one of my colleagues, Rodrigo Carrillo. He ran and was in charge of the $1.2 billion that got out via the Illinois Housing Development Authority that helped Illinois avoid the eviction cliff. And one of the things that matters who's in this seat, right? Is this a person of Mexican descent, strong immigrant roots? Number one, he said, we're going to make sure everything is in multi-languages. It's accessible for people that have different physical abilities, and we're going to make sure that documentation never comes into play. And so we figured out here in Illinois, how could undocumented families also access rental assistance and avoid the eviction cliff? So it matters who's there locally. To Beto's point, we got to get them there. And then to Ed and Mai's point, they've got to bring people like us, right, who've been here, people like you, right? I can't wait till you either become the next governor of the state of Illinois or serve one.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Well, thank you, everyone. I think that, it all starts with you being here today and having this conversation, too. So I hope it goes on and, with your families, with your friends, and we'll be in touch. Thank you so much for being here with us today.